Good morning, everyone. We are about to start. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sunday teachings at CKSL. It's online. So we are going to continue on A Guide to Bodhisattva's Way of Life by Acharya Shanti Deva, led by Venerable Lekden. And thank you so much, Venerable, for coming all the way here. And over to you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone online and here in person. Thank you for joining us today. Very good to be back. Our Sunday morning classes have been on a little bit of a break for about a month because he's been busy at the monastery and there's been a guest teacher for a few weeks. So I'm very excited to come back and continue our Sunday morning classes. As we start today, let's just take a moment to settle into our place. Whatever activities we've been doing all morning, whatever running around we've been doing, let's go ahead and set that aside. Whatever worldly activities have been occupying our mind, let's put those away and let ourselves be fully present together here, fully dedicated to our practice of study and implementing that study into our way of life. And with that, let's set a strong motivation that the reason we are studying the teachings of the Buddha is not merely for our own benefit, not merely for us to have serenity or calm or peace in this life alone, but it is so that we might develop the techniques, the wisdom, the compassion that allow us to be of service to others in a meaningful way. And our lives will improve as a result. That's a side effect. It's not the goal. The goal is to learn how to open our hearts, to make our life meaningful, and live a life that is in service to others. And with this regard, all of our actions are aimed at our achieving perfect, complete Buddhahood, not simply a positive rebirth, not simply freedom from samsara for ourselves alone, but actual, perfect, complete Buddhahood, because in that state, we will have the greatest capacity to be of service to others. So in seeking to liberate others, we liberate ourselves. And with that in mind, we keep that as our strong intention, the uncommon Mahayana motivation. And my study today, my practice, my meditation is all for the purpose, the immediate purpose of taming my mind, applying myself to the Buddhist teaching, with the long-term purpose of becoming a Buddha in order to benefit other sentient beings. So keep that motivation strong and active in your mind. And we'll begin with some preliminary prayers. Would you like to lead? Really? I'm going to say we'll lead.
Yes.
Oops. To page 34 of the Gold Prayer Book. Where we'll begin. Sangye Shudan Soki Shonam La Danju Baru Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Hinso Pe Sonam Gi Jola Pincher Sangye Dru Parsho Sangye Shudan Soki Shonam La Danju Baru Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Hinso Pe Sonam Gi Rola Penche Sange Druparsho Sange Chiran Soki Chonamba Chancho Bardu Dani Kyasuchi Dagi Jinso Gipe Sonamgi Rola Penche Sange Druparsho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. The Buddha, Dharma, the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May all sentient beings be acceptable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May all sentient beings be acceptable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I declare clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. These remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the weight of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of others to the great enlightenment. Short Mandal offering. Sajibu Jo Shte Sange Shindo Mi Te Wami Joke Namada Shi Che Shomi. This ground anointed with perfume, strong with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, for continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offering. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ramandala Kamniya Kayami. Page 73. Continuing. Page 73. Praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, no other world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata and the other worlds, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the complete and fully awakened one, the thou transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shaka clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you are born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides, then said, I am supreme in this world. You who were wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom motion like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like the vast ocean, to you, the one gone to dustness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the divine community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realm atoms in all aspects, whose supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your own mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through these merits, we sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, but burn away of aging, sickness, and death. The heart of the perfection of wisdom sutra. I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on Mount Sakosha mountain in Rajagriha together with a great assembly and a great community of Bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration of the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of a lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of a lineage or daughter of a lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound possession of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no alternative touch, and no phenomena. There is no eye element, and so on up to and including no mind element, no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death, no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration, without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the 3 times also manifestly, completely awakened to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment, reliance upon the perfection of wisdom. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known as the truth since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Dayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, Bodhisattva, Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of a lineage, it is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated, and even the Thagatas rejoice. Then the Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and really praised that which we by the Bhagavan.
Page 81, prayer to the lion-faced Dakini. I prostrate to the gathering of Dakinis
In the three chakras, abide in the holy yoga of using space. By your powers of clairvoyance and magical emanation, look after practitioners like a mother her child. Akasamarata Shadara Samarape. Akasamarata Shadara Samaraya Pe. Taya da Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhi Swaha. By the teaching of the three supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may inner and outer hindrances be transformed, may they be dispelled, may they be pacified. Shintam Kuriya Swaha. May all negative forces opposed to Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. May all employment Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here right now. Thank you, everyone, for that. As we begin today, it's been a few weeks since we've had this class, so it would be good to start with a brief meditation to help align our minds, to calm ourselves, to prepare ourselves to receive the teachings of the Buddha as explained by Shantideva. So what I thought we would do is a brief 9-round breath practice of meditation. And so I'll describe it briefly, and then I'll talk us through as we go. So this meditation technique actually comes from Tantra, though His Holiness Dalai Lama has taught it in open audiences to non-Buddhists as well. So it's appropriate for everyone to do. And I especially appreciate this practice at the beginning of a meditation session, because for me personally, it helps me, it gives me more to do, right? So when I'm trying to get out of the busy activity of everyday life and focus on my meditation, it's a way to really jump into the meditation. So the practice is we visualize the subtle body, which is made up of different channels and drops. In the subtle body, we picture our central channel, which is like a tube made of light. It is blue in color, it is about the width of your pinky, and it runs just in front of your spine. And for the purpose of this meditation, you visualize this tube running up, made of light. It curls up to the top of your head, and then it comes down, and it terminates right between your eyes. Now, on the bottom end, it terminates about 4 fingers width below your navel. That's the central channel. It's blue in color, about the size of your pinky. Then on either side of it, you have the right channel, which is red in color, and the left channel, which is white in color. They are also made of light. They are slightly smaller in diameter than the central channel. Up at the top of your head, they separate from the central channel, and the right channel terminates at your right nostril. The left channel terminates at your left nostril. But other than that, they run parallel to the central channel, all the way down to the bottom. Like I said, about 4 finger widths below your navel, where all 3 channels join together. So they're all fused. And so as we meditate today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to visualize that we breathe in through one nostril, We visualize that air coming in the form of white light and going through whatever channel that nostril is connected to. And we visualize the air sweeping through that channel, crossing into the other channel, coming out the other channel, and pushing away all of our delusions, all of our obstacles, all of the things that are holding us back in our practice and our understanding. And we do 3 times, breathing in one nostril, exiting the other. Then we reverse 3 times, breathing in the other nostril, exiting the other. And then 3 times, bringing in both nostrils, in which case we visualize that the air in the form of white light that we breathe in enters into our central channel. And as it exits, biologically, we'll be breathing through both nostrils, but we visualize that the exits through our central channel, which is, again, it terminates between our eyebrows. So that's the visualization we'll be doing as we focus on the breath. So to begin with, let's just make sure we're in a comfortable posture. Traditionally, that would be sitting with your legs crossed, but whatever is most comfortable for you. The important thing is that you feel solid, that you feel balanced, that you don't feel like you are in any way topsy-turvy, right? You want to have a solid seat. If you're sitting in a chair, you want to have your feet flat on the ground, about shoulder length apart, if that's possible for you. You can let your hands rest comfortably on your thighs or your knees, wherever they naturally fall. If you prefer to put them in the meditation mudra, you can. That's the right hand on top of the left, with your thumbs just barely touching. And that triangle kind of positioned right at the level of your navel with your elbows out. So this is also possible. But for most of us, it's easier just to let your hands fall within an accurate line on your thighs or your knees. You want your spine to be nice and straight. Your chest should be open, right? You don't curl in, but you're also not puffed out like a pigeon. You want to be nice and comfortable. Visualize your spine almost like a stack of coins that is just perfectly upright. And then allow your head to follow the natural curve at the top of your spine. So again, your head is not staring up at the ceiling and it's not tucked in, but it just follows that natural curve. Let your eyes remain half open. Let all your muscles in your body be nice and loose and relaxed, and that includes your jaw. So you don't want your jaw to be clenched, so your mouth might hang open a little bit. Let your tongue rest on your hard palate behind your upper teeth. And allow your gaze, as I said, your eyes are half open. Your gaze follows the tip of your nose to a space about 1 meter in front of you, but it's not focused on anything. It's also not closed off to the world. So it is a combination of receiving, but not engaging. But once you feel comfortable in this posture, I'll guide us through this practice. And now, since we are going to be breathing through one nostril and out the other, we can actually use our finger to block the nostril we're not using to help us with our visualization. You don't have to do that. If you can visualize breathing in one nostril on your own, that's fine. However, it is easier for most of us to go ahead and use our finger. So we'll begin, as I said, by breathing in the left nostril. And for this, we breathe in nice and slow. So our normal meditation, when you're trying to calm your mind and focus on your breath, you let your breathing fall into a natural rhythm. But for this 9-round breathing, we breathe in slowly and deliberately, and then we hold the breath for a moment, and then we breathe out slowly and deliberately, and we hold on empty. So it's breathing is regulated. It's not your natural breathing. It'll be more of a performative type of breathing. Okay? So again, we start by breathing in on the left. Breathing in on the left. Hold. Now visualize it comes out of the right channel. Breathing out on the right. Again, breathing in the left channel. Hold. Visualize that light moving to the right channel, sweeping away all your obstacles as you breathe out. One last time, breathing in on the left. Breathing out on the right. Now breathing in through the right. Visualize that white light transferring over into the left channel, breathing out through the left. Again, in through the right. Out to the left. One last time, in to the right. Out to the left. Now breathing in through both channels. Breathing out through the central channel. In through both. Out through the central channel. And one last time, in through both channels, visualizing the light, entering in through both, joining at the center. As you breathe out through the central channel, you visualize all of your obscurations being cleared away. Now, allow your breath to resume its natural rhythm. So, thank you. So, as I mentioned at the top, I'm very glad to be back, returning to Shantideva's text. It's been quite a while. As we start today, let's take a moment right now just to adopt the 3 attitudes that are beneficial for our practice and our study. So whenever we go about studying a text, especially, it's important to remember to adopt these 3 attitudes. First is the attitude of the long view, which is recognizing that our goal is not an immediate goal. Our goal is not simply to improve ourselves in this life, but our ultimate goal is to become Buddhists, right? That's the big picture kind of attitude. So it is a long way away, right? And we recognize there are many goalposts along the way, right? There's many temporary benefits we'll receive in the process, but our ultimate goal is we need the big picture, right? A long view. So that's the first attitude we have to cultivate, that we don't expect immediate results. We're in it for the long haul. And then the second attitude, in addition to having the big picture attitude or the long view, is we have the wide or expansive view or attitude. And this is recognizing that in order to achieve this big picture view, there isn't one simple thing we can do. There are many different techniques. There are many different things we have to study. There are many different pieces we have to put together. And so sometimes it might even feel overwhelming. There are so many of them. But if we go into it knowing that we're going to be practicing in many different ways, then having that attitude is helpful, that expansive attitude, because it shows us that no matter what obstacles we experience, there'll be a way in our practice to overcome those obstacles, right? So that's the expansive or the wide view that is in addition to and supporting the long view. But then the last attitude is we have to adopt a relaxed attitude, an attitude that realizes, yes, our goal is very far away. And yes, there are many different things we have to study and practice to achieve that goal. But we're doing the best we can. And if we're too uptight, then it's not going to move us forward. If everything has to happen right away, if we expect perfection right away, immediately, then we're not going to ever achieve our results, right? We're going to be working against ourselves. So we have to always be pushing ourselves, but be relaxed in the way we do it. That way we prevent burnout and we encourage and celebrate all the victories that we actually achieve. So let's take a moment to bring to mind that we want the big picture, long view, the wide, expansive view that realizes there are many techniques to study and practice, and the relaxed view that realizes that as beings living in samsara, we're not perfect, but we're doing the best we can, and we don't expect immediate results. So before we jump into the text today, for our Sunday morning class, I'd like to talk a little bit outside the text about how the ideas and the philosophy of the Dharma can make our lives better in every moment, right? And something I've been thinking about, especially this last week, well, in general, let's say, it's a hard time to be alive. It feels like everything is going wrong all the time, right? The economy is difficult, politics are awful, and politics are infiltrating our everyday life. It's not something you can avoid and pretend isn't happening, right? I'm sure we all know people who are experiencing extra difficulties because of those politics. Climate change is real. The weather is pretty normal where we are now. It's warm, but that's normal for this part of the city. But it hasn't really rained a lot here in Bangalore. We're missing rain. Whereas my friends in the UK, it's 35 degrees. In the UK, it has been for over a week, which is, wildly inappropriate for them. So climate change is happening. There's wars happening all over the world that major superpowers are involved in. And we say, well, what can we do in the face of all this, right? How can we find contentment and happiness and lead a meaningful life in the face of all this overwhelming distress that's like genuine? And that's just on a global level, never mind our personal lives, that we have friends and family who we care about who are going through difficult things, whether it's illness, whether it's job loss, whether it's whatever it may be. How do we keep a mind of Dharma to hold us afloat when it seems like everything is against us? And how does the Dharma help us? So I've been thinking about this a lot. What can we do in the face of all this? Well, one of the things that motivated me recently, or got me thinking, that I like to engage in pop culture, right? And I like to use pop culture as a way to practice the Dharma. I recently read Cat's Cradle with a friend of mine. Cat's Cradle is a book by Kurt Vonnegut. It was written in 1963. Kurt Vonnegut's an American sci-fi / absurdist satirical author. This is written in the height right after the Cold War, right? 1963, after the Bay of Pigs. Kurt Vonnegut was conscripted into the army in World War II. He fought against the Germans. He was captured. He went to a prisoner of war camp in Dresden, Germany, and he worked there as a prisoner of war when the Allied forces bombed Dresden, which was filled with refugees and with prisoners of war. There weren't any army bases or anything like that. And over 25,000 civilians died because the Allied forces gave a firebombing campaign. So that's Kurt Vonnegut's perspective. So all of his fiction is very political, but it's absurdist and ridiculous at the same time. And his opinion about things is often very bleak. Like he doesn't see hope for the world quite often. Like everything is going to hell in a handbasket. And in this book, Cat's Cradle, there's one chapter where the narrator, who is filling in for Kurt Vonnegut, he allows a nihilistic poet to borrow his apartment, and the poet destroys his apartment. And the end of that chapter, he says, then I realized nihilism is not for me. So I looked at this and I said, well, it feels like Vonnegut as an author is very nihilistic. But he says very clearly, nihilism is not for me. So how can we hold those two things at the same time? And so what I came to realize is, instead of nihilism, he really adopts a dark kind of pessimism/realism, which is different than nihilism, which says, yes, we live, and this is me putting Buddhist language into it, we live in samsara, which is difficult. Life is chaotic. No matter where we are in time or place, life is difficult. That's the nature of samsara. It isn't easy. It always feels like it's working against us. But that doesn't mean we should give up hope. That we can recognize how difficult the world is and still recognize that we have a capacity to change ourselves within that world. We have the capacity to act out of kindness and compassion when the world itself is nothing but angry and mean and horrible. Denying the reality of the suffering is not going to benefit us. Trying to pretend everything is fine all the time isn't going to help us because we're not dealing with reality. We need to adopt a realist attitude. The Buddha was a pragmatist, if nothing else. He said, this is the situation you're in. This is how to get out of that situation. So how can I adopt, or how can I recognize that even my realism may verge into pessimism, but never becomes nihilism? Because nihilism, now I'm not talking about the philosophical viewpoint of nihilism, which we often talk about when we talk about the correct view of Buddhism. I'm not talking about that, though they are related. How can we, what I'm talking about, like a social idea of nihilism, is that nothing matters, right? Everything is so awful all the time. Then what's the point of me even trying? Because I'm never going to change the world in a meaningful way. That attitude does nothing but keep us in suffering. So we have to find the balance of how can I recognize and acknowledge the chaos of the world, and yet within that find hope, find a strength for kindness, and find a capacity to be of service to others. Not allow my despair at the suffering in the world turn into nihilism, right? And what the Dharma says is, as difficult as it seems like the world is now, samsara is always difficult. That is the very nature of samsara. The foundational definition of samsara is that it is unsatisfactory. Whether we're in the middle of a war or a famine, or everything looks like it's going well, it's still samsara. And the only way to change samsara is to change our minds. By transforming our mind, we allow ourselves to transform those around us. And then through that, we transform samsara. So it has to start with our mind. And we have to look at our capacity. Even in the darkest and most difficult times, there's always a way that we can find an opportunity for kindness. Right? I can't change the world in an immediate sense, but I can be kind to those people around me. I don't have unlimited funds to go support worthy causes, but I can help my friends and neighbors when they need it, if I have the means to do so. There's always someone I can help. There's always a way I can be of benefit. I may not be able to topple authoritarian governments, right? But that's not my job. My job is to be the best person I can be, given whatever resources I have, both emotional and fiscal and environmental resources are available to me. Whatever privileges I have, I use them to the best of my ability. And I don't measure my success by any external measure. That's the important thing. I measure my success by saying, am I doing the best I can do with what is available to me? When someone treats me harshly, do I respond with anger or do I respond with kindness? When I see people that are suffering and I have a means to help them in a worldly sense, never mind a super mundane sense, do I do something or do I ignore it? Do I turn away? That is how I measure success, is by my own actions and my own mind. Is my mind today more aligned with achieving liberation than it was yesterday? Am I pointed in the right direction? So it's important not to let our mind and our attitude become one of nihilism. We always have to see, how can we help? And what can I do? I have a good friend who is an environmental scientist. And his job primarily is he works for companies to do assessments for their green initiatives to see if whatever initiatives they're doing are actually like what is the best way for them to be engaging in these green initiatives. And he says the unfortunate thing is he goes through all these assessments, which involves like going to different locations and viewing the natural wildlife and doing all these things. But most of the people that hire him don't actually want to take his advice. They hire him, but they want him to give them answers that are going to solve their situation like overnight. And he says it's not how it works, you know? And just buying carbon credits isn't good enough. But most of them are big companies and they want to receive some sort of tax break. And so buying carbon credits or planting trees is like the easy answer to be being a green company. And so he does all this work, but he says usually they don't really want my advice. They just want the letter that says they consulted an environmental scientist. And so he was saying it's very depressing sometimes doing his job because he sees how quickly we are accelerating climate change. And he's advising people how to change it, and they don't want to because money is more important. Like short-term gains are more important than the environment. But he says, I can't not do my job with because I care too much about the environment, and this is a way I can help. And if one company at least follows my advice a little bit, then they're going to be making a big change. So I can't pretend that like my job is worthless. Never mind that I need to support my family and I have to live in the world because he's not as lucky as me to live in a monastery as a monk, very privileged. He actually has a real job and a family to support and a house to pay for. But never mind that. He's like, I have to believe that like the work I'm doing matters because I care about the environment and I'm always working in the right direction. I'm not single-handedly going to fix the environment, but at least the work I'm doing is bringing awareness to the environment, and it is bringing awareness to these big companies and private companies as well that are trying to move in the right direction. So as long as I'm working to the best of my ability to bring about change, I don't have to, my success does not depend on the results. And that's something I think about a lot. My success does not depend on the results. Because as we said, we have to have a long view attitude. I don't expect results, the main results, to happen overnight. My practice, now I've been practicing Dharma, for 2.5 decades. I've definitely seen results in my practice. I've seen my mind change. I don't say I have any sort of realizations or anything fancy like that, but I've seen myself go from a very, very angry teenager who wanted to fight the world to someone who's much different, right? Who can find a little bit of peace sometimes, who doesn't have to swing back when people swing at me. Just a little bit. So I've seen the change and I've seen the benefits. So that I'm not saying that the whole point of practice is to only think about the future. You're never going to see benefits in this life. You'll definitely see benefits in this life from practicing, from trying to transform your mind. But you have to also acknowledge that the long-term goal is going to take time. And so we don't allow ourselves. The Dharma gives us the techniques to see how am I doing right now? What is the thing I can do in this very moment to make my life the most meaningful? How can I dedicate myself through love and compassion to benefiting others right now to the best of my ability? And accept that by doing that, by working to overcome my own ignorance, my own anger, my own attachment, by fighting my self-cherishing mind, recognizing the nature of reality and the way that I cause my own suffering over and over again, by realizing that my happiness doesn't exist outside of me, but it exists within me, that as long as I grasp externally to find happiness, I'm always going to be dissatisfied. As long as I put all the blame outside of me for my difficulties, I'm always going to be dissatisfied. The more I can actually understand those things experientially, not just intellectually, I'll find benefit in my life. I'll find that my life is easier. I'll find that I have less stress, even when I'm in difficult circumstances. And because my life is easier in that way, then I have more options available to me of how I can then be of service to others. So the short-term goals, long-term goals, they work together. But I recognize that my practice as an individual is always able to benefit others, even if it doesn't seem like it. I can't allow the dumpster fire that is contemporary life in the world bring me down. I can be upset by it. That's not to say you look at suffering and you say, well, it doesn't affect me. I look at the wars that are happening right now and I say, this is horrible. all the lives that are lost, and all the economic instability all around the world. It's only going to get worse, right? Especially in developing countries now, because of the war in Iran, they haven't been able to get fertilizer, they haven't been able to get fuel, they haven't been able to do what is necessary. So, like in the next year and a half, you're going to see lots of food shortages in developing countries, India as well as other parts of South Asia, right? Because they're dependent upon fertilizer and fuel that come through the Strait of Hormuz, which hasn't been operational for months because of one American president and his ego, right? So I can look at that and I can say I can have genuine sadness due to that. So I'm not ignoring it, but I'm also recognizing that does not immobilize me. I allow myself to stay. Even if I can't fix that problem, I can fix this problem right here. And by fixing this problem, that has an effect on the world and on my loved ones, on my friends, on my family, on those people in my community. There's always something I can do. And so the Dharma gives us the techniques to do that. So that's what I have been thinking about this week. With that, that's a good segue into this text, because why are we studying the Bodhisattva's way of life? You know, the Bodhisattva's way of life by Acharya Shantideva was written in the 8th century, or composed in the 8th century. He lived in Nalanda Monastery. And on one hand, this is a very advanced text. It's a text that no matter how long you've been studying and practicing, you can find important teachings and advice to always continually renew your practice. On the other hand, it's incredibly accessible. So no matter what level of practice we have, we can reach into this text and find something that is going to apply to our lives right now that we can do. A bodhisattva is someone whose life is pervaded by the 6 perfections, right? The perfected qualities of generosity, morality, patience, joyful effort, concentration, and wisdom. And so by trying to adopt those 6 perfections in our life to the best of our ability, we try to live the life of a bodhisattva. We try to make our lives the same as the life of a bodhisattva. And as we get closer and closer to developing full bodhicitta, so the actual mind that is unfabricated and effortless, that always wishes to benefit others through our own achievement of Buddhahood. As we develop that mind, we become familiar with these perfected activities. And so these perfected activities help us accumulate merit, they help propel us on the path, and they have immediate effects in our life. Like immediate. If you practice these 6 things in your life to the best of your ability, they'll have immediate benefits. So this text, while it is very advanced, especially the last chapter, at the same time, it's accessible to all of us. And it's accessible in a way that shows us what an ideal life would look like. Now, we can't always live up to this ideal life because we're not bodhisattvas yet, right? So sometimes the advice he gives, you might say, well, that's good for other people, but I can't do that, right? And you say, well, I can't do that yet, but I can do my best. I can recognize that due to my circumstances, my own obstacles, my own delusions, I'm not there yet. But that's the goal, is to live that kind of life, to naturally have the kind of responses or attitudes that Shantideva advises us to have. So we look at the figure of a bodhisattva as something we can realize, something we can accomplish in this life. We can all be bodhisattvas in this life. And every day we practice, we move closer to it. And so this text gives us not just an outline of practice, but also it gives us the exemplar that we're trying to live with. And the text itself is written in such a way that it is very easy to apply to our lives. It's not just an intellectual text. It's not just adding to our education, right? It's giving us actual techniques that we can use in our everyday lives, because that's what's most important. The more we study, if our study stays in our heads and it is an intellectual understanding, that doesn't benefit us. We need to transform our intellectual understanding into experiential understanding. And that's why our practice of meditation comes in and our practice of reflection comes in. That is how we bridge our intellectual awareness to an experiential understanding. You know, I studied Buddhism as an academic for a long time, and I have good friends who are still professors of Buddhist studies, Tibetan Buddhist studies in academia. And you see across professors, some are Buddhist practitioners quietly, like it's not a part of the public persona, but they practice. And others have no interest in practicing. They just study it as an academic subject only. And you can see the difference in the way they engage the Dharma. One group considers it a living thing that is transformative and is always changing and will make all of our lives better. And others consider it this dead thing that they can master and they can know and they can explain. And the result is the experience of listening to them teach is quite different. I've met many people who know the words of the Dharma far better than me because they've been studying it for decades as an academic. But I mean, I don't know their minds, but from the way they behave and the way they talk, it seems like not a single drop of it has permeated their minds because they're not interested in it. They're interested in only as an academic subject. And we say, well, what good is that? Okay, you can be a professor, that's great. But if it doesn't transform your life, then what's the use of the Dharma? Right? So a text like the Bodhisattva's Way of Life is wonderful insofar as it is such direct advice that it's very easy to put into practice. It's very easy to meditate on. The meaning is clear for the most part. There are some parts we need to untangle, right? But the meaning is clear, and then it's not theory, it's practical. And that's especially true for the chapter we're on. So we're in the middle of chapter 6. So we can look at this text as having 3 larger sections. The first section is how to develop Bodhicitta, this mind that wishes to become a Buddha to benefit others. And that is encompassing chapters 1, 2, and 3. Then the next section is how to protect your Bodhicitta from declining. So once you have some flavor of Bodhicitta, right, this mind that wishes to benefit others, how to make sure it doesn't decline. And that is chapters 4, 5, and 6. And then chapters 7, 8, and 9 are then how to increase your Bodhicitta to make it even more powerful. So these are the 3 sections. So on chapter 6, we are at the very final section, or the final chapter of the section of how to protect our Bodhicitta. And so this chapter is dedicated to patience. So the perfection of patience. And it's dedicated to patience especially as an antidote to anger. Because anger is the most destructive of the negative emotions. Now, anger itself, we say, comes from ignorance, right? We have these 3 root delusions of anger, attachment, and ignorance. And ignorance is the real root, the misunderstanding of the nature of reality that causes us to project both anger and attachment onto external objects. However, anger itself is so powerful that this chapter is only looking at anger. And they say Shantideva says, a moment of anger towards a bodhisattva can destroy eons worth of positive karma that we've accumulated. So it's very dangerous, this one. And now patience isn't actually an immediate antidote to anger. What patience does is when we're able to develop a mind of patience, it prevents anger from arising, right? So patience is sometimes translated, in Tibetan, the word is zopa. Sometimes it's translated as tolerance or forbearance, sometimes as endurance. Endurance is a little bit of a strange one, but it is sometimes translated that way. Patience is the more common one. What it is the mind that remains undisturbed in response to hardship. That's what patience is. The mind that does not allow itself to be riled up or disturbed when experiencing hardship. So the way that is an antidote to anger is we recognize that anger itself is fueled by our mind of discontent. Discontent, you can say sadness, but also discontent or unhappiness is a fuel that causes anger to burn. That discontent may come when we don't receive the things we want, or we receive the things we don't want. Or conversely, when those people who we consider our enemies receive the things they want, or don't receive the things they don't want, that also can cause us to be discontent, right? If we're going to be focused on ourselves, not getting what we want, or those people who we're in competition with getting what they want. When your team doesn't win the World Cup, another one does. That's a sense of discontent, right? And that discontent is the fuel that burns and blazes into anger. So what patience does, a mind that does not experience any sort of disturbance in response to hardship, prevents us from feeling or experiencing that discontent, that unhappiness. And so what we're doing is depriving anger of its fuel. So patience itself prevents anger by eliminating the capacity for fuel for the anger, right? So when you experience anger, when you notice yourself in a moment that you're overwhelmed by anger, you can try to practice patience as a way to subdue it, and that may help. They often advise trying to practice love towards the opposite of anger instead, because love is the wish for another person to have happiness and positive happiness, whereas anger is the wish for them to experience harm, right? If it's focused at a person. So those two things can't occur simultaneously in your continuum in a manifest way. So in that way, love is a more direct antidote to anger, right? Patience, it precedes anger, prevents it from arising. So we can see which of these is more helpful, and it's going to depend on our circumstances, right? But the goal is to prevent anger from arising in the first place. So in that way, we see there are multiple types of patience, right? Or the perfection of patience especially is divided into multiple types. So there's one type that is patience that tolerates suffering. So it's, well, first off, to get to our chapter, it starts out by discussing the why anger is so bad, why anger is so deleterious. So that's the beginning of the chapter. The early part of the chapter is explained to us how anger is our real enemy, that external enemies don't matter or compare in any way, shape, or form to the internal enemy of anger, because anger is the most destructive thing we can experience. And it causes far more suffering for ourselves and others than external enemies. The worst an external enemy can do is take my life, whereas my anger can cause me to create negative karma that then I have to bear the consequences of for many, many future lives. So in that way, anger is so much more of a dangerous enemy than any external enemy, right? So that's the beginning of the chapter. It's just pointing out why anger is so dangerous. And then it reminds us of the ways in which anger is fueled by discontent. And then we get to the actual different types of patience. So the first type of patience that is discussed is patience that tolerates suffering, which is to say, recognizes, and especially environmental suffering, such as sickness, such as inclement weather, such as all of these things that are out of our control, and realizes that there's no point in developing a sense of discontent or frustration in response to this type of suffering, because if you're able to avoid it, then you can do something to alleviate it. And if you're not able to avoid it, there's nothing you can do about it. There's no point in being distressed by it. Because again, we take a realistic approach. If this is the way things are, and I can change them, then I should work towards changing them. And if I can't change them, is the mind of discontent or frustration or anger going to help me in any way? And when you realize it's not, then you say, what's the point of it? So that's the first type of patience that's discussed. The second one is the patience that is in reliance upon the Dharma. So that is basically saying patience where you're willing to endure difficulties to study the teachings and to engage in meaningful spiritual practice and to engage in the practice of virtue, right? So we recognize that it isn't always easy for us to engage in virtuous practice or spiritual practice. Even coming to a teaching like this, we take 2.5 hours out of our day. Those of you who come here in person add another 2 hours for traveling through Bangalore to get here, right? To and from. And it's hot, it's uncomfortable, we have fans going, but could be a little cooler. So we're putting up with these difficulties, which aren't big difficulties, right? In the scheme of things, being mildly uncomfortable and warm and traveling isn't a big difficulty, but it is a difficulty. We'd much prefer not to have those obstacles, yet we're willing to endure them because we believe there's some benefit to studying these teachings together and spending this time together, right? So we recognize that engaging in virtue isn't always easy, and yet we're willing to do it anyway. And there's a type of patience that comes with it, willing to endure hardship for the sake of studying and practicing the Dharma, or patience that is in reliance upon the Dharma. And so that brings us to where we are today. So today we'll be starting on verse 35. And this is the patience that is indifferent to harm. Now this, in many ways, so in our book here, it is on page 58. In many ways, this is the most important type of patience to practice, and it's the hardest type of patience to practice. It's relatively easy to develop patience when you're like, it's hot and uncomfortable and sticky, and I don't like the weather. I can't do anything about it. It's relatively easy to develop a mind that isn't angry about that, right? Or discontent. And if I can see the benefit of engaging in virtue, it's pretty easy, again, relatively speaking. to have patience with regard to the difficulties that I have to face when I try to practice virtue. But when I'm experiencing harm from another person, trying to have patience with regard to that is very difficult. It's the most difficult. And yet it's the most important one in many ways. So that's what this section is on. And now, this will come up later, but an important thing to remember, especially in this section, is this is giving us a viewpoint of how to engage in our own practice. This is not something we prescribe for others to do. You'll see what I mean when we get there. But this is a way of recognizing that as someone who is trying to lead a spiritual life that is meaningful, this is the way I can reflect upon my experiences to overcome my own experiences of difficulty. But it isn't saying that I expect everyone else to be doing the same thing. And you'll see what I mean when we get to those verses. But just remember, this is about how to view our experience in such a way that it leads to personal spiritual transformation, right? That's the important. So verses 35 and 36 is where we'll start. So again, this whole section, I don't know if we'll cover the whole section today, you might, is about how to develop patience with response, patience that is indifferent to harm. Through not being careful, people even harm themselves with thorns and other things, and for the sake of obtaining women and the like, they become obsessed, deprive themselves of food. And there are some who injure themselves through the unmeritorious deeds of hanging themselves, leaping from cliffs, eating poison and unhealthy food. So this is showing us that beings, due to their lack of understanding, due to their ignorance, or motivated by ignorance and attachment, right? They engage in activities that cause physical suffering to themselves, sometimes intentionally, right? Such as depriving themselves of food so they might be more beautiful, so they can attract a mate, right? And sometimes unintentionally, they're careless when they travel around and they, cut themselves on thorns and so forth. So because of their own ignorance, people engage in activities which cause them their own suffering. And then it goes on to say that they sometimes, due to their ignorance, which then leads to their experience, discontent, they might even develop a mind that says they should take their own lives, right? So this is just reminding us that individuals, due to their delusions, of course they are capable of causing suffering, physical suffering, because they cause it to themselves, sometimes on purpose, sometimes on accident. And therefore, since people engage in these difficulties, we should look at them not with contempt, but with compassion. Out of your ignorance, out of your delusion, you cause harm to yourself, either accidentally or on purpose, right? So it's reminding us that people or individuals, due to their delusions, cause suffering to themselves as well. And so then the next line says, 37, if, when under the influence of disturbing conceptions, people will even kill their treasured selves, how can they be expected not to cause harm to the bodies of other living beings? So what these verses together are reminding us is that if we look at other sentient beings and we see the way they harm themselves out of their ignorance and out of their attachment, then why would we ever be surprised that they're willing to harm others as well? If our delusions are so powerful they can cause someone to take their own life, then of course that same delusion can cause them to lash out and try to harm another sentient being. So this is just reminding us we shouldn't be surprised, right? That's the important takeaway. One of the reasons our reactionary emotions are always so active is because we don't have a realistic outlook. If we're constantly surprised by people causing harm, then we haven't developed the techniques to respond to that harm in a meaningful way. So we shouldn't be surprised. And this doesn't mean we should think poorly of others. It doesn't mean we should expect the worst of others, but it means we shouldn't allow ourselves to be surprised when others cause harm. And the reason for that is we can observe that people are overwhelmed by their delusions, and from their delusions, they're willing to cause harm to themselves, either on purpose or on accident. So of course they cause harm to others, right? It's just common sense in this way. So that's what these verses are starting with by reminding us, is that we shouldn't be surprised that others cause harm. We talk so often about our real unhappiness, our discontent, comes from our self-cherishing mind, right? The mind that says, I deserve happiness more than you. My happiness is more important than your happiness. I deserve profit. I deserve compliments. I deserve all the nice things. I deserve luxury. I deserve comfort. And I don't want the opposite of those things. That's what the self-cherishing mind tells us. And as long as we follow the self-cherishing mind, we're never going to be content. We can observe that in other sentient beings. We're encouraged by our society, and this is not a 21st century thing. Society has always encouraged people to chase after the self-cherishing mind. It has encouraged this worldly attitude of saying, you're right, your happiness is the most important thing, and your happiness is a thing you can buy. It's a thing you can earn. It's a thing you can hold on to. That's what worldly life tells us and has told us for thousands of years, right? So we can observe others constantly looking outside themselves to find happiness. And the more they do that, all they're doing is grabbing onto suffering, but believing they found happiness. So they might have moments of happiness or bliss, but they're very temporary. And in fact, what they're doing is causing greater suffering for themselves. So when we can observe that, we can say, of course, they are under the control of the delusions. And if they're under the control of the delusions, then of course they're going to engage in harmful activities. Look, they cause harm to themselves. So when they cause harm to others, either to me or to people I know or care about, it's not to say we should accept that and just be fine with it, but we shouldn't be surprised, right? So that's what these first verses are reminding us. All of these actions of harm are really coming from self-cherishing. All of our actions, all sentient beings, we want to be happy and we don't want to suffer. And overwhelmingly, all of the actions you see sentient beings engage in are for that goal, to achieve happiness and to avoid suffering. But the problem is, due to being overwhelmed by our delusions, we don't really understand what brings about happiness and what brings about suffering. And so we run after suffering thinking we're chasing happiness, right? That's what the self-cherishing mind, and that's what ignorance does, is it causes us to misunderstand what is a cause for happiness, what is a cause for suffering. And so we can see that in our own lives, and then we can extrapolate. We can't know others' minds, but we can observe their actions, and we can hear the way they explain their actions. And as a result of that, we can extrapolate that they are also engaging in harmful activities because they want to be happy. No one engages in harmful activities because they don't want to be happy, but they think that those harmful activities are going to bring them happiness. And we recognize that as being wildly inaccurate, right? But they're not doing it simply for the sake of doing it. They want to be happy. They think that robbing a bank is going to bring them happiness because money is going to bring them happiness, because money will allow them to buy things and that will make them happy. So you can see the chain of events that make them think that these harmful actions are actually going to bring happiness to them. And from the outside, you can say, of course, that's not going to bring happiness. But from the inside, their goal is the same as ours, to live a life of happiness and to avoid a life of suffering. Right? So we shouldn't be surprised when other sentient beings are harmful. And if we're not surprised, then that means we can develop the proper response. So we're not caught on the back foot, so to speak. Right? So this continues. Even, so verse 38. Even if I cannot develop compassion for all such people, who through the arisal of disturbing conceptions set out to try and kill me and so forth, the last thing I should do is to become angry with them. So this is showing us that when we recognize that those people who seek to cause us harm are under the control of their delusions, then we should realize that what they're doing is causing more harm to themselves than to us. And that should mean that they are objects of compassion. But it can be very difficult to develop compassion for those who are actively trying to harm us. Now, a bodhisattva has great compassion that is indifferent to how others treat them. So if you're living life of an actual bodhisattva, your wish for others to be free from all suffering and all the causes of suffering is the same for all sentient beings, regardless if they're helping you or they're harming you or they're indifferent toward you. Your compassion for them is the same. And the same type of compassion and love a mother has for her only child, we have to develop that level of compassion and love for all sentient beings, which is very difficult, right? So what Shantideva is saying here is, if someone tries to harm me, I should look at them and recognize that their actions are due to their own wish to be happy and their own misunderstanding of happiness due to their ignorance. And because of that, they're causing suffering for themselves that's even greater than the suffering they're causing me. And because of that, I should actually develop compassion for them. However, if I can't develop compassion for them because I haven't trained my mind well enough to do that, at the very least I should do is not allow myself to have anger toward them. The goal would be to have compassion. But if I can't have compassion, the least I can do is to not have anger, right? I can recognize they're acting out of their illusions and therefore don't allow myself to develop anger. Because as we said, anger, me being angry towards someone who's harming me, doesn't stop them from harming me. And it doesn't change their mind. It doesn't affect the harm they create against me. What it does is affect me, right? My anger doesn't prevent others from harming me. My anger harms me. It doesn't harm others, or it doesn't stop others from engaging in harmful actions. Which is why, I mean, I know we're jumping into the middle of this chapter because we started it previously, but the reason the chapter starts by describing the disadvantages to anger is to remind us that it is natural as a samsara being who is pervaded by ignorance, that when someone harms me, I respond out of anger. That's a natural emotional response because I am in samsara and because samsara is the very nature of unsatisfactoriness. So there's not to say it's abnormal, but it is saying it's not beneficial. And it's not even beneficial in a worldly sense because my anger isn't causing them to change their mind. My anger isn't causing them to behave in a more meaningful way. All it's doing is making me engage in non-virtue. That's all my anger is doing. So when someone harms me, if I'm not able to experience their harm with a mind of compassion, the very least I should do is not develop a mind of anger with response to it. And so then the remainder of the section goes about how we can try to develop that mind, how we can experience the harm of others. What are the types of analysis we can use to help us not develop minds of anger in response to others harming us? So the remaining verses of this section are going to give us things to think about, basically, right? Things to engage with in meditation that help us realize how developing anger is meaningless towards those who cause harm to us. So the section starts out by giving us a thesis that says, when others harm us, it's due to their ignorance. Therefore, we should have compassion for them. If we can't have compassion for them, then at the very least, we should not have anger towards them. And then it gives us a number of techniques to help us ensure that we don't develop anger because it points out why that anger is pointless and doesn't have any valid basis. So it's useful whenever you engage in a text like this to see how all the pieces work together, right? Because that allows you to integrate it into your life in a more meaningful way. So then, continuing with verse 39, and I didn't say at the top, but as usual, feel free to interrupt me with questions at any time if there are questions. We'll try to save some time at the end for questions as well. But if there's something that isn't clear, you're welcome to interrupt me to ask those questions. So verse 39 says, even if it were the nature of the childish to cause harm to other beings, it would still be incorrect to be angry with them. For this would be like begrudging fire for having the nature to burn. So we look at other sentient beings and it calls them childish, right? But what that means is a childish being doesn't understand what is appropriate activity to adopt and what is an appropriate activity to abandon. So until you engage in meaningful spiritual practice, we also don't understand these things, right? And so when a child acts like a child, you can't get mad at them for acting like a child. You know? You can, but what's the point? They're acting in the way of their nature. You know, when you get burned by fire, fire's only nature is to burn. So how can you be mad at fire for burning, right? Or, you know, the way I think about it is I'm very friendly towards all the street dogs that live in Sarajay. There are a lot of them. And there are some that don't like human interaction, let's say. So you have to be a little careful around them because they might bite. And I've only been bitten twice. Neither time was actually my fault. It was a dog. Anyway, but If a dog strikes out at you to bite or growl or whatever, they're acting like they're a dog. Like that's what dogs do. You can't be mad at a dog for biting you because it's acting like a dog, right? We project on other animals this idea that they have these human emotions, but they still are animals that live in the fear that comes with an animal mind. So if a dog bites, that's what dogs do. How can you be angry at a dog for doing what a dog does? It's not possible. Or I mean, it's possible, but it's useless, right? Like, what are you getting angry at? When a child acts like a child, it's because they're a child. You can't be angry at them in any meaningful way. That anger is totally misplaced, right? So this is saying if it were the nature for sentient beings to cause harm, then if it is their actual nature, why would you be mad? How could you be mad at them for just acting in the way that is in their nature? Now, it's not positing that it is their nature, but it's saying if it were the case, that childish beings had as their very nature to be agents of harm, then since that was their nature, how could you be mad at them for that, right? But then it gives you the other option in verse 40. So the verse 39 says, if it was in the nature of childish sentient beings to be harmful, then it's out of their control because it's their nature. So there's no point in being angry at them. In the same way, you don't get angry at fire for burning. And then verse 40 says, if the fault, which is to say, if their harmful actions were temporary, and they who are by nature reliable, then it would still be incorrect to be angry. So this would be like begrudging space for allowing smoke to arise in it. So these two verses are saying, if it is their nature to have anger and harm, then there's no point in being angry at them because that's their nature. They can't change it. If it's not their nature, however, due to whatever external conditions or environment, they experience anger temporarily and they engage in harmful actions temporarily, it's also no point to be angry at them because that is something that is constantly changing and it's out of their control as well. So in the same way, when there's smoke in the sky, you don't get angry at the sky for having smoke. The sky simply exists in such a state that allows smoke to fill the sky. So you can't be angry at the sky for having smoke in it because it's not the nature of sky to be filled with smoke, right? The nature of sky is open and empty and open. But due to its nature, when the conditions arise, smoke fills it, right? If you go to Delhi, Delhi is filled with pollution, right? But it's not the nature of the sky in Delhi to be filled with pollution. It's the nature of the factories that create the pollution and the fields that are burnt, that fill the air with smoke, that cause all that smog. The sky itself is empty. It's merely receptive. So you can't be angry at the sky for being filled with smoke. So this is showing the two possibilities, right? Either sentient beings have as their nature that they are harmful, that they engage in harm as their very nature, or that's not their nature, but it is a temporary adventitious condition, we said, that comes about due to causes and conditions. And in either one of those cases, it would be inappropriate to be angry at them. In the first case, it would be inappropriate because they're just following their nature, if that were the case. In the same way that fire burns, you can't get mad at fire for burning because that's what it does. And in the second case, it isn't their nature. It's due to external circumstances that are outside of their control that is causing them to engage in harmful activities in the same way that the sky is filled with smoke. And you can't be angry at the sky for allowing itself to be filled with smoke. So these two verses together, 39 and 40, are pointing out that whenever a being engages in harm, they're going to fill one of these two categories or some spectrum between them. Either their very nature is to cause harm, or their nature is not to cause harm, but due to circumstances, they engage in harmful activities in a temporary or adventitious way. And in either one of those cases, responding to that harm out of anger has no basis in reality, right? And it goes on to explain why there is no basis in reality. Now, these verses are some of the most important verses in this chapter, and they're also the ones that you'll see why they're important to apply to our life, but not to others. So the next verse says, if I become angry with the wielder, although I'm actually harmed by the stick, then since the perpetrator too is secondary, being in turn incited by hatred, I should be angry with their hatred instead. So what this means is, I will say this translation we're using is not my favorite, even though I said that this text itself is very easy to understand. I find Stephen Batchelor's translation We happen to use this one because we have many copies of it, which is why we use it. It isn't the easiest to penetrate sometimes. If someone beats you with a stick, right, your natural inclination is to be angry at the stick or the person. Our natural inclination is to be angry at the person, right? We say the stick is what's actually causing me harm. The stick is what's striking my body. That's the direct cause of my pain, is the stick they're beating me with. But I'm not angry at the stick. I'm saying the stick has a cause, an indirect cause, which is the person yielding, right? So my natural inclination wouldn't be to be angry at the stick and be angry at the person, right? So this is saying in the same way, that person who is yielding the stick, they aren't in control of their actions because they are under the influence of their own hatred, their own anger, their own ignorance. So in the same way, the stick, which you experience as the direct cause of your pain, isn't the one actually causing you pain. There's no point to be angry at the stick. You also shouldn't be angry at the person wielding it because they're not in control of their actions. They're acting out of their own anger, their own delusions, their own ignorance, right? So it's showing that they may be serving as one of the causes for your experience of harm, but they have themselves a cause propelling their actions. So being angry at someone causing you harm would be the equivalent of being angry at a stick that is being yielded when it hits you and causes you harm. That's what Shantideva is pointing out. And so you say, well, there's difference, right? Because I'm not going to be angry at a stick because it doesn't have any thought. Whereas a person holding the stick has thought. They have the intention to harm me. So therefore, they're not equivalent, right? And he responds to that. So let me continue with the next verse. Well, let me respond briefly about it. When we look at direct and indirect causes, we need to see where are we putting blame for our experience of suffering, right? That's what's going to come into the next verses. When I experience suffering due to others causing me harm, where do I put the blame? If I step on a thorn and cut my foot, or step on a piece of glass and I cut my foot, do I put the blame on my lack of awareness that I stepped in this glass, I wasn't paying attention? Do I put the blame on the glass for being there? Do I put the blame on everyone else who saw that piece of glass but didn't clean it up? Even though how many times have I walked past it and not cleaned it up myself? Where do I put the blame for my experience of physical harm because of stepping on the glass, right? It's worth looking at. Now, usually I put the blame on myself for being so dumb and not paying attention, which is valid. But then you say, well, what is that blame doing? Is that blame relieving me of my suffering? Because I still have a piece of glass in my foot. Or is that blame causing me to be more conscientious when I walk, right? So you have to, when you assign blame to something, blame is a very heavy word, but when you assign blame, that concept, what is the purpose of it? And if the purpose of it is not to transform your actions, then it's not useful. If I say, well, the blame obviously is on everyone else who walked by that glass and didn't pick it up, it's not my fault, then I'm not taking responsibility for my own lack of awareness. And I'm not taking responsibility for the fact that if I hadn't stepped on it, I also wouldn't have picked it up because I would have walked right past it, right? So what I'm doing is ignoring personal responsibility and putting it on others. This doesn't mean that, yes, no one should leave broken glass on the ground. That's not saying it's okay for others to engage in harmful activities or mindless activities, but it's saying that putting blame on others in that way isn't going to change my mind. It isn't going to bring about happiness to my mind. It's not going to bring about content. All it's going to do is make me dissatisfied. And if I'm dissatisfied, what does that serve as fuel for? Anger. And what does anger do? It causes me to engage in harmful activities that are non-virtuous, that bring about suffering to myself and others. So there's no benefit in that way. So in the same way, if someone is beating me with a stick, and I put blame on the stick, you say, well, that's not useful, because the stick isn't under its own control. The stick is under the control of the person holding it. But if I put blame on them, I say that's also not useful, because they're under the control of their anger. Otherwise, why would they be beating with a stick? Because they think that beating with a stick is going to bring them happiness, right? So that's obviously a delusion. So they're under the control of their delusion. So what is being angry at them? How is that helping me? It's not. And how is it helping them? It isn't, right? So if I'm angry at their anger, if I'm angry at their delusion, I put the blame where it really belongs, is on the delusion. Then is that helpful? And it is helpful, because then if I have frustration, not with the individual, but with the delusion, the only way to overcome that frustration is to try to eliminate that delusion in my own life, and through doing that, prevent it in others' lives as well, right? So we need to recognize, where is it useful to put blame? And is blame is blame useful in all circumstances? And I'd say probably not. But when it is useful, it should be pointed at the real cause of our suffering. And if we look at the temporary cause, which is the stick or the person holding the stick, that's not an appropriate object upon which to complain, because they're temporary causes. So that goes into the next verse that says, what is the actual cause of my experience of suffering? So verse 42 says, previously, I must have caused similar harm to other sentient beings. Therefore, it's right for this harm to return to me who caused injury to others. So here, it is right. It doesn't mean I deserve this, right? It's not a matter of deserving or punishment. It's a recognition of karma. If I engage in harmful actions in the past, or I caused harm to others, then as a result of that, I've created a negative karma that will ripen in my experience of harm. If I never created the negative karma that would ripen as the experience of experiencing harm, then I would never have harm from others, right? We know when we create karma, all of our actions, whether virtuous or non-virtuous, carry karmic weight. And a complete karmic action can have 4 different types of karmic results, generally. There's the fruitional result, and then there's the completed result. And so the fruitional result is generally the result that it's also called propelling karma, is the result of what type of rebirth we take, whether we're reborn as a human or as another hungry ghost or an animal and so forth. But then the completed result has 2 categories. There is the result that is similar to its cause, and then there's the environmental result. And the result that is similar to its cause has 2 types. The result similar to cause and experience, and the result similar to cause and habit. And so what this means is, if I engage in the action of killing, let's say, and I create a full karmic action of killing, the fruitional result of that action will be being reborn in a lower realm. The completed result of that action. Now, the fruitional result and the completed result don't always have to happen simultaneously, right? So the completed result might be that. So again, the completed result has 3 types: similar to cause and experience, similar to cause and effect, and environmental. So environmental might be that I might be reborn as a human, but then be born in a place where I experience maybe poverty or hardship or violence directed at me, or I have great sickness, or I have other, obstacles to my life. I have a short lifespan and so forth. Those are the environmental results. The result that is similar to the cause in experience would be others cause harm to me. Others want to harm me. Others engage in harmful activities directed at me. And then the result that's similar to the cause in habit means I have the habit and the instinct to again cause harm because I've done it in the past. I've created those neural pathways, even though it's a different life. You can use some bio language here. I've created the habit to engage in harmful activities, which makes it easier to do again in the future. That is a type of result, karmic result. So of those different types of karmic results, this is pointing at the result that is similar to the cause and experience. The reason I'm experiencing harm now is because I engaged in harmful activity towards others in the past. Not necessarily in this life. Most likely, my actions in this life, most likely the karmic results of those won't occur in this life. They can, but often we're experiencing the karmic results of past lives, right? Both in our experiences of joy and celebration and the benefits and privileges we have, and the deleterious experiences. So when someone causes harm to me, instead of being angry at the stick they're using to beat me with, and instead of being angry at them for yielding that stick, I recognize that they themselves are under the cause of delusion and anger. And the reason I'm experiencing harm is because I've created the conditions that are now ripening as my experience of harm. I may not remember it, may not have been in this life, but this is negative karma that is ripening on me right now. And I created that negative karma. Someone else can't create negative karma, and I experience the results of it. I can only experience the results of karma that I've created, both positive and negative. Right? I can't experience the results of someone else's karma. I can only experience the results of my own karma. So if I'm experiencing pain right now, and I'm experiencing someone having anger towards me to such an extent that they're willing to assault me, then I created the causes for this. Now, we can also say that, yes, I may not have been responsible for the immediate temporal cause of this life. They might just be an angry person and I don't even know them, and they see me on the street and decide to attack me. That's possible. I may not have done anything in this life to create the temporary causes, but I created the causes in the past life to experience this harm. So this isn't a matter of blaming the victim. It's saying it's your own fault, therefore you deserve to be harmed. That's not the point, right? And again, this is why this is not useful to look at others. It's useful to look at your own experiences. So if someone else is being abused, you don't say, well, you deserve it because you created bad karma in the past. Let's live with it. That's not a useful attitude, right? That doesn't help us. But if I look at my own experiences of being harmed, and then it's not to say that I should seek out someone who's going to harm me, but it is to say that when I'm experiencing it, it's already happening. So therefore, I put it in context. And the context says this is happening because I created negative karma in the past. And now that karma is ripening. Yeah, it's ripening at a time and a place where I have the emotional and spiritual means to recognize it and to not respond in anger, to not create more negative karma as a result. And I may have the privilege or means or the conditions that allow me to escape this harm, right? If I'm in an abusive relationship, I may have the ability to leave that relationship, right? So even though this is harm that is coming as a result of my own causes in a past life, I'm experiencing the ripening of this negative karma at a time when I can do something about it in a meaningful way, whatever that may be. Even if all that means is not getting angry, or if it means removing myself from the situation, or if it means something else, whatever it may mean, I'm experiencing this harm at a time when I can do something about it, both in a worldly sense, possibly, but most importantly, in a spiritual sense. Okay? So this verse is reminding us that what is the real cause of our harm? It isn't the temporary cause, which is the person actively harming us. It is the negative karma we created in the past that is now ripening. And you can see why I say these verses can be very powerful. But if we ascribe them to others, that's not useful. So if I look at someone experiencing harm, I say, well, it's your fault. You created negative karma in the past, deal with it. That is not an appropriate attitude, right? The attitude should be, I look at my own experiences of difficulty, of whether it be harm or any type of suffering, poverty, illness, and say, these difficulties I'm experiencing are the consequence of my own past negative karma that I've created. Yet it's ripening at a time when I can do something about it. And at the very minimum, in a spiritual way. I can look at these difficulties and not allow them to create a sense of dissatisfaction or unhappiness. And therefore, I don't develop a mind of anger, and therefore, I don't perpetuate greater suffering. Because all that anger is going to do is make me suffer more. It's never going to eliminate my suffering. You know, if someone acts like a jerk, let's say someone, is mean to you or pushes you or is wrong to you, and you punch him in the face, knock him out, might feel great for a moment, right? That moment of like victory, of protecting yourself, of standing up against the bully, it's going to feel really good. But it's not solving any problems, both in an immediate sense and a long-term sense, right? So that very brief moment of like exaltation is not all it's doing is finding happiness in suffering. That's what that's doing, right? That's not helpful. And it doesn't bring any long-term benefit in this life or in future lives. So being willing to look at others who are harming you and experience that harm in such a way does not bring about your own anger is incredibly important. And so this is one of the things that we can reflect on, that every experience I have in this life is due to the karmic conditions that I have created in the past. And whether they are the experiences of pleasure and delight, or the experiences of harm and discontent and suffering. These are all the ripening of karma that I've created. So now that I know that, I can respond appropriately. By responding appropriately, what that means is I can celebrate all the virtue I've created in the past, and I can use that inspiration to continue creating virtue. And I can recognize the non-virtue I've created in the past. I can be glad that that negative karma is ripening at a time when I can navigate it in a meaningful way, and I can work to such an extent to not create more non-virtue, because I know that I don't want to continue experiencing the suffering in the future. So my experience of suffering now compels me to avoid practicing non-virtue, because that way I can avoid suffering in the future. So whatever my experience is in this life, be they joyful or harmful, I can use those to propel myself into a spiritual practice. And the way that's important is because that allows my mind to stay content. That allows my mind to stay focused on the goal of accumulating compassion and bodhisattva and developing wisdom that allow me to benefit others in the most meaningful way.
Venerable.
Yes,
So can I ask you a question? Yeah.
go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I can. It is a little quiet, but I can hear you.
Okay. So, in a personal experience, I had a case where a very close friend of mine, whose the husband was very healthy, kind of suddenly dropped dead. Okay, so she, being a very top-notch doctor, tried to revive him, but he kind of passed away. And there was apparent no reason why he kind of suddenly collapsed. Of course, some of those medical histories, which are mystery. So she really doesn't understand karma, but she asked me because she knew I'm following this path. So she said, was this his karma? So
Hmm.
it's kind of very difficult. So I understand for my own self what it means, but to kind of really explain to the other person how to really kind of soothe the person without saying, yeah, maybe he did some karmic, his negative karmic
Hmm.
seeds are ripening now. So do you find a very skillful way how to handle this? Because she's kind of really
Yeah.
going through a
Mm-hmm.
terrible
Yeah, I got
trauma.
you.
So,
So the
how
question
do you?
is, um, a friend of hers husband recently passed away very suddenly without any real causes or conditions. He was healthy and he passed away, and there's no real scientific reason as to why he passed away so suddenly. And her friend is not a Dharma practitioner, but she said, is this his karma? And the question is, how do you respond to something like that to someone who isn't a Dharma practitioner in a way that's helpful and meaningful to them, right? This is a constant balance we have to do of trying to live a spiritual life and realize how we can negotiate that with other people. So, for instance, no one in my family is Buddhist except for me. And my sister's a therapist and a psychologist, so she's down with a lot of the mind science and a lot of the emotional realities and the emotional sciences. But if I talk about karma, she's like, yeah, okay, sure. Like it doesn't interest her, right? So talking about it isn't going to benefit her in any way, right? And so it sounds the same with your friend. And so then what you have to find is a way you can be supportive of them, where they can try to understand their experience of grief and loss in such a way that is meaningful to them, doesn't allow them to continue into despair, and doesn't allow them or doesn't encourage them to sink into thoughts of hopelessness. So it may not be karma is a useful topic for them. So if they say, is this karma? If they ask you that, you can say, does that help you? If I say yes, or if I say no, does that change your experience of loss? And if they say, well, it'd be good to know, then you can try to explain something in like a soft, easy way, right? But if it's not going to help them, then you have to say, okay, what can I say that is helpful to them if they're seeking my advice? Now, in my experience of dealing with people who are experiencing loss, and this is part of working through hospice, doing hospice training. And I did hospice training I did it obviously as a Buddhist, but not working with Buddhist patients, working with non-denominational, non-religious people. When people are going through the death process, often they just want someone who recognizes their grief, who validates their grief, and recognizes that even if there are causes for it, it doesn't make it any less devastating, right? Because if her husband was living with cancer and died of cancer, she'd still be devastated, right? And so being present with people who are experiencing the dying process, whether they're dying themselves or their friends and family are, being present with them, recognizing their grief, validating it, and then holding up a space for them to experience their grief but not be overwhelmed by it is very useful. And you can use Dharma language to do that or not. It's going to depend on the person. So for me, Dharma language is helpful because it creates a worldview and a context that allows me to experience grief in such a way that it doesn't overwhelm me. And so then, depending on who I'm working with, I use my experience of Dharma in such a way that I try to modify the language to help them, right? So I can't give a specific answer, but I will say that for many people, if they don't believe in karma, explaining it to them is not useful. And even for people that do believe in karma, it's very easy to misunderstand karma as you get what you deserve, right? And blaming the victim. And that is also not a helpful attitude, right? So whenever I teach karma, you have to really try to walk that line and say, yes, I'm experiencing this harm because I created the causes for it. But that doesn't mean I deserve it. No one deserves to suffer. Karma is a natural law of cause and effect. It's not a matter of someone judging you and saying you deserve to be punished for your bad actions, right? So you have to find that balance in your own practice, and then you have to see what is most useful. So this is where the combination of wisdom and compassion comes in. I mean, I just saw an interview, a really good interview actually, with Robert Irwin. Robert Irwin is the son of Steve Irwin, who is the crocodile hunter. I don't know if you know him, and who died more than a decade ago, I think, even more than that, in a freak accident, like swimming, where a stingray, of all things, moved its tail and it pierced his heart, and he died like very randomly. This is the man who like literally goes out and like wrestles with crocodiles, and a stingray of all things killed him. And so he has two children, and one of them is Robert Irwin, who is continuing his father's legacy of animal conservation, and he runs the zoo in Australia where he lives. And so I saw this interview with him talking about his dad. And he actually brought up some Buddhist language. I don't think he's trained in Buddhism, but in a very non-religious language. He was talking about grief. And what he's come to realize is that grief, and this is an important thing when you're dealing with someone who is going through the dying process or someone who has experienced loss, grief is not something you overcome. Grief isn't something you make sense of. Grief is something you live with. Because grief, at least grief at the loss of a loved one, comes because you cared about that person, right? Grief is the flip side of having love for another person, is that you have an absence in your life. And what happens when you try to navigate that kind of loss is that you are trying to find a way you can live with your grief, because your grief reminds you of the joy of having that person in your life. So at the time, at the immediate moment of loss, that grief can be overwhelming. But the goal should never be to try to get rid of the grief, because you're not going to. You're going to learn to live with the grief, right? Which doesn't make it easy, but it makes it something that is actually comforting to some extent. Because if you didn't have any grief, then you wouldn't feel any, like the grief comes from your care for that other person, whether it be worldly care or not, right? So when I'm navigating people who are in the dying process, I find it very useful to validate their grief and to also make sure they realize that that grief is not something they're going to overcome. It's not something that's going to go away. It's going to be something that they navigate and learn to live hand in hand with. And that grief eventually can be an opportunity for them to realize how much joy they have with that other person. And so that grief, to some extent, can keep that other person alive in their mind and in their heart in a way that's meaningful, right? And that is a very non-Buddhist way of understanding grief and loss. So you can use that kind of language, right? But karma is not always useful for people that are not Buddhist. To get back to your direct question.
So venerable.
Sometimes it is. If she asks about it, then maybe it is. But you have to just be very careful in using that kind of language, you know?
Yeah. No, I think this case got more complicated because there was this immense guilt. She's a top-notch doctor. So I did give the positive, saying that look at the positive side, that you were there when it happened. You tried to revive him. You're a top-notch doctor, so you gave him the best of medical. So, but her guilt that being a top-notch doctor couldn't save my husband. So that is getting more complicated. It's been more than 3 years, but it just.
So this idea of guilt and blame, it goes with the idea of karma actually, because you say, okay, what is this guilt useful? You know, is this guilt making you miss him any less? You know, and is this guilt allowing you to go back and change things? And it's not. All the guilt is doing is creating a barrier between your experience of joy that you had living with this person and your own mind, right? The guilt isn't bringing you close to them. It's only causing you more pain, you know? So if the idea, you know, when we talk about lifespan, part of karma is that, and part of human lifespan, or not human, sentient beings' lifespan, is that when you're born, your lifespan, to some extent, is determined. Like you say that sentient beings are going to live for, any individual sentient being has a lifespan that will end. And we don't know when that end is going to be until it comes about. But that is part and parcel of being a sentient being, right? And that's a whole, like, birth and death teachings are a different teaching in Bardo teachings. But if it is useful for them to understand that there was nothing they could do, I mean, they know this intellectually, right? So the trick is to find the language that helps them bridge their intellectual and their emotional experience. They know that, so the person is a doctor, she said, I'm sorry, the other people here can't hear because the volume is so quiet on the computer. The woman who lost her husband is a doctor and tried to resuscitate him and wasn't able to. So she feels a strong guilt about her husband's death. if the language of karma is useful to help her overcome that guilt, then great, you can use it. And just be judicious in the explanation. For me, more useful is exploring what they are feeling and to say, is this feeling useful to you? Is this feeling keeping you connected to your experience? Is this emotion right now keeping your loved ones alive in your mind or not? So that's why these teachings, even this one specifically about experiencing harm, we have to, and even the next verses are even more direct. It's not useful to apply them to others because it's a way of reflecting on our own experiences that we apply to ourselves, which is part of, I've talked about before, this idea that I kind of think of as the Bodhisattva paradox, which is as a Bodhisattva, I have to look at all of my responsibility is that no one else can free me from suffering. No one else can eliminate my experience of suffering. I have the responsibility to do that on my own, right? No one else is going to do it for me. Even if they want to, even if they try to, the Buddha can't eliminate my suffering. All the Buddha can do is show me the path. It's my responsibility to free myself from suffering. And yet, as a Bodhisattva who's committed to benefiting all sentient beings, it's my responsibility to liberate every sentient being from suffering. Which seems paradoxical, right? That no one can help me except for me, yet I have to help everyone else. It's my responsibility. So in the same way, with that kind of attitude, when I look at the harm that I'm experiencing, I say my experience of harm is because I engage in harmful actions. But I can't look at other people that are causing harm or experiencing harm and say it's their fault, therefore they should deal with it, right? The way I use this type of study and practice is to transform my mind. It is not to transform others. I transform others by living in a way that is meaningful that they can observe, and then I act with love and compassion toward them. So teachings of karma are very, in dealing with loss and grief is a very difficult time. And so it's a matter of seeing what is most useful for your friend at that moment, right?
Thank
And
you.
sometimes, I had one patient who didn't really know anything about Buddhism, but he wanted a Buddhist monk to help him go through hospice. He had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, which is like a slow degenerative disease, right? So when I first started meeting with him, he could even walk a little bit. He had a wheelchair, but he was mobile. And then as we kept meeting, he declined to the point where, especially with ALS, you forget how to swallow. Your body forgets the ability to swallow, and then it forgets the ability to breathe, essentially, right? Because you lose all motor function. But so in the beginning, he was much more mobile, but he didn't know anything about Buddhism. But for some reason, he had seen the book of Tibetan, the book of the living and dead, the book of dying, and he wanted to learn about it. And so he wanted a Buddhist monk to come give him hospice care. And so I met with him, once a week for a few months, and giving him Buddhist instruction. He didn't really believe all of it, right? But he wasn't interested in believing it. He just wanted a different context through which he could view his experience, and that was meaningful to him, right? So you have to find out what is going to be meaningful in the situation, do the best you can. And it could be using Buddhist language, even if they're not Buddhist, or it could be trying to use a more humanist approach. I hope that helps a little bit.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Karma is a difficult one to explain, both to Buddhists and non-Buddhists, because it feels so blamey. And it's because we live in a culture that is focused on blame and judgment, right? Our first instinct is to blame and judge, either ourselves or others, right? That's because of our self-cherished mind and our ignorance, but still, that's what our culture encourages us to do. And so karma, when you explain it, can feel very blamey. And we're used, at least, I can speak as someone who's coming from a Christian country and a Christian upbringing, that we're used to this idea of punishment. And so it's so easy to conflate karma with punishment, that I am being punished for my bad actions by some God in the sky, or who knows what, some supernatural force is punishing me. And as long as we have that attitude, we're not going to understand karma correctly, right? And so it's very easy to be mixed up just because our experiences of everyday life encourage that. So we have to try to look at karma in a very disaffected way that just says cause and effect are natural. If I stick my hand in a fire, I'm going to be burnt. And that experience of pain is because I put my hand in a fire, and it's fire's nature to burn, right? It's not me being judged. It's not saying you're a bad person. It's not saying you deserve to be burned. You're burned because you put your hand in fire. There's a big difference of deserving pain and experiencing pain, right? And so karma is one of those topics. And so when we continue with these next verses, we have to keep this in mind, that There's a difference between responsibility and blame. There's a difference between experience and deserving an experience, right? So verse 43 and 44 say, both the weapon and my body are the causes of my suffering. Since the other gave rise to the weapon, and I gave rise to the body, with whom should I be angry? If in blind attachment I cling to this suffering abscess of a human form, which cannot bear even to be touched, with whom should I be angry when it is hurt? So the first verse here is reminding us that my experience of pain is not simply because I was beaten by a weapon, but it's because I have a body that is susceptible to experiencing pain. And the reason I have this body, which is made up of the contaminated aggregates, is because I'm a samsaric being. So there are two causes for the experience of pain: the body that experiences pain, as well as the object causing pain to that body. I am the cause for the body, and then the exterior, the stick or the weapon or whatever it may be, is the other cause. And only when those two causes come together do I experience pain. And yet I put the blame on the external cause and not the internal cause. Yet both of them are causes, right? So again, this is just offering us another viewpoint to view the experience of harm, to not allow ourselves to be angry at it. Because the harm, I could not experience pain if I didn't create the karma to be reborn in this body that is susceptible to pain, and if I didn't create the karma to experience harm. Both of those are internal causes. So if I'm only focusing on the external cause, and therefore using that as a valid basis upon which to develop a mind of discontent and a mind of anger, then that is not observing all of the causes. If I'm going to be angry at the person beating me, I should be angry at my own body as well, because my body is the one experiencing pain. And then the next verse, 44, is supporting it, is saying that I cling to this body due to my self-cherishing mind, right? I think that my body, out of my blind attachment, I recognize that this body, this human body, is so susceptible to experience pain and suffering. You know, when you do meditations on death and impermanence, one of the meditations, when you do meditations on death and impermanence, there are three main points, right? That that death is certain, the time of death is uncertain, and nothing will benefit us at the time of our death except for our spiritual practice. And one of the points, the sub-points of that middle one, the time of death is uncertain, is we recognize there are more things in the world that are contributing to our demise than that are contributing to our life. It's more difficult to stay alive than it is not to, basically, right? My body itself is designed to experience pain and suffering due to the nature of my body. Again, not because I deserve it, but that's what my nerves do. And to some extent, I need them. If I didn't experience pain when I put my hand in a fire, then I would destroy my body. And there are some people whose nerves don't work correctly, right? Who don't experience physical pain. And it's an incredibly dangerous condition for those people that have it. It's very rare. I don't remember the name of it right now, but they're constantly hurting themselves because they don't experience pain and they are causing significant problems to their body, right? So my body exists in such a capacity that it can experience pain, physical pain and discomfort. And yet I cling to this body so much because I put all my hopes and my dreams on this one life because of my self-cherishing mind. And I say the only way I can experience happiness is if I get everything I want and if I have comfort. And therefore, discomfort, I shy away from it. So the verse here says, I cling to this body, but this body is like an open wound that if you even touch it, it experiences pain. And yet, for some reason, I cling to this body as if it is going to bring me actual happiness. If I didn't cling to this body with such strong attachment, if I didn't have such self-cherishing mind, then when others harm this body, it wouldn't affect me. The only reason I have a mind that is disturbed when my body is harmed is because I cling to this body as if it's the most important thing in the world. If I recognized that, yes, this body is important, having a perfect human rebirth or something similar to it gives me an opportunity to practice Dharma. I shouldn't waste it. I shouldn't be heedless with my body. But this body is not happiness. This body is temporary. This body is the result of causes and conditions that is in and of itself in the nature of suffering because it is a samsaric body. So if I cling to this body as if it were my liberation, then of course I'm going to be upset when someone causes harm to this body. But if I let go of that, if I don't have attachment to this body, then when others cause harm, I'm not going to have that same sense of disruption or dysregulation, right? So part of the reason we're experiencing anger in response to harm is because we have such attachment to this body. Yet this body is as permanent as a water bottle, right? This body itself is like an open wound that experiences extreme pain very easily. Why do we have such attachment to it? If I don't have attachment to this body, then I won't experience this immediate sense of harm, of anger in response to others' harm. So I still think that my natural response to reading these verses is always what I call the yeah, but response of a samsaric being. Yes, it's true that they're under the control of their delusions. Yes, it's true that they're not in complete control of their actions in a karmic sense. Yes, it's true that I experienced suffering because I caused the causes for it in a past life. But, right? My life is full of these kind of buts. That is me trying to avoid responsibility for my own emotional response to the experiences of this life, right? And that is our natural way. And again, it's not me avoiding blame. It's not to do with blame. It has to do with responsibility. And saying that I'm responsible for my life. I'm responsible for my reaction to the world around me. I can't be responsible for the world. I can't be responsible for what's going on, but I can be responsible for how I respond to it. So if I look at all of these reasons lined up where me responding out of anger is not beneficial, and not only is it not beneficial, but it's not appropriate, but I still find excuses for it, that's because I'm trying to avoid personal responsibility for my emotional state. And I'm trying to use the fact that they're causing harm as an excuse. And it's tempting. It's tempting to say, I shouldn't have compassion for Donald Trump because he is a harmful person who is an egotistical maniac who is causing uncountable harms across the world. And that can be, I mean, I don't know his mind, but that seems like a relatively true statement. I don't know, it seems that way, that he's causing great harm across the world due to his ego and his greed, right? Yet, that's not a reason for me not to have compassion for him. That's not a reason for me to look at his suffering and say his suffering isn't valid. It's okay for him to suffer. That's me making the excuse, my inability to develop actual great compassion. That's what it is. Because those two things can be true at the same time. Yes, he's causing harm, whether to me directly or to people I know or to the world in general. That is true. I can observe that and objectively say he's doing that. Yet he is a suffering, sentient being who wants to be happy, who does not want to suffer, and due to his delusion, is going about it the wrong way. And therefore, he is an object for my compassion. Now, how I enact that compassion may be different. I'm still going to go protest his policies. I'm still going to stand up for people that are experiencing oppression and experiencing discrimination, who are experiencing the harm that his policies and his actions cause. Yet I do that without any hatred, without any anger, with a mind that says, I want everyone to experience happiness and not experience suffering. Right? And if I don't have that mind, it's not because of him. It's because of me making an excuse for myself. And this is where these teachings, we can see that living the life of a Bodhisattva isn't easy, right? So this is the ideal, which is why earlier in the chapter, Shantideva says, if I can't have compassion for the one causing me harm, at least I start by not having anger, right? Because anger is not going to benefit me. It's not going to benefit them. So that's the starting point, not developing anger. And then hopefully that lack of anger can eventually develop into empathy, which can then develop into compassion. But at least the starting point is not having anger. His Holiness says, in any given situation, if I can't help someone, at least I can not cause harm. At the very minimum, right? And having a mind of anger is nothing but harm. The mind of anger is a mind that wishes to harm others. And is not benefiting anyone, including and especially myself. So the yeah buts, there are so many of them. My life is filled with them. And all these verses encourage me nothing but yeah but. But that is useful to be aware of, because then I look at my mind, and then I can sit with it in my meditation, and I can say, someone causes me harm, and my first reaction is to say, yes, it's not their fault because they're acting out of delusion, but they didn't have to do it. Like, they could have been different. Why is that my first reaction? I look at it and I can see it's because I'm so protective of my body, or I'm so protective of whatever it is. I'm so attached to my possessions. Why do they steal them? I'm so attached to my own sense of comfort. I'm so afraid of physical harm, right? That's not excusing people who cause harm, but it's putting it in context. Context is useful and important. It's not an excuse. Karma isn't an excuse for people to do whatever they want, right? Karma is a recognition that people engage in behavior due to their delusions, due to their experiences of whatever actions they've done in the past that are ripening and their misunderstanding of the nature of reality. So it's an understanding context. It's not an excuse to get away with whatever you want, right? Let's continue because these things come up a little more. So the next two verses, 45 and 46. So this, again, we have to put in context. We just talked about how the reason I experience such discontent when I'm harmed is because I have attachment to my body. And that attachment in and of itself is coming from my own ignorance and my self-terror, right? It is the fault of the childish that they are hurt. For although they do not wish to suffer, they are greatly attached to the causes of suffering. So why should they be angry with others? Just like the guardians of the hell worlds and the forest of razor-sharp leaves, so is this suffering produced by my actions. With whom, therefore, should I be angry? So what these two verses are reminding us is that while we say, I don't want to experience suffering, I am obsessed with all the causes for suffering. I run after non-virtue all the time. I let my attachment and my self-cherishing lead me around by the nose, right? And if I've done some spiritual study, I know what is the cause of suffering and what is the cause of happiness. And yet I still run after samsaric delights. I still allow my mind of self-cherishing and the 8 worldly concerns to govern my actions. And as someone who's trying to live a spiritual life, if I am constantly seeking out the causes of suffering and labeling them happiness, then of course other sentient beings are doing the same way. So how can you, or how can I be frustrated with someone when how can I be frustrated with someone who gives me harm when I'm constantly creating the conditions and causes to experience harm? When I'm running after the causes of suffering, then when I experience it, how can I be surprised by it? And how can I put the blame on someone else? I'm the one that is so obsessed with samsara, right? I'm the one that's seeking out my own comfort, my own happiness. I'm the one that is seeking out my own popularity, my own praise, and so forth, and trying to avoid the opposites of those. I'm the one that allows attachment to cause me to engage in the most foolish behavior, right? So I've created all these causes, and I am obsessed with the process. So when those causes have fruit, how can I be upset? And so the next verse, where 46 is reminding us that the hell realms, there are different ways to understand the hell realms. But one of the recognitions is that if you're born in a hell realm, our tradition says the hell realms actually exist. They aren't just mental states, that it's a human being with a mind like a hell being, that the hell realms actually exist. Yet they exist due to the karma of the being that is living in that hell realm. So most hell realms are personal hell realms in that regard, right? It's not a group of sentient beings who are all experiencing the same hell realm simultaneously. And so the depictions of these hell realms are often quite fantastical, but they evolve quite often. Hell guardians or other beings who are causing you harm, right? Who are attacking you with weapons and so forth. Those beings only exist due to your karma having created a projection of this being who's causing you harm in the hell realm. That's one way of understanding hell realms. They aren't other sentient beings. They are projections of your own mind that come about due to the cause you created when you were born in that hell realm to experience the pain of being, I don't know, cut by a sword or whatever it may be in that hell. So, and then the other example is the razor sharp leaves of the trees. You know, one of the neighboring hells talks about these trees who their bark and their leaves are made of swords that are pointing downward. But at the top of these trees are these most beautiful people who you have great lust and attachment for. And so you try to climb the trees, even though to do so means climbing up against all these razor leaves that are cutting your body into ribbons. And then you get to the top and the object of your attachment has disappeared, right? So there's another type of hell realm where it says that those trees and their razor leaves only exist because you've been born with the karma, or the ripening of the karma experience those types of suffering. They don't exist independently from their own side. They are the result of causes you created, right? So regardless of the helmholtz, that's just an example that says our experiences of suffering are due to the ripening of causes that we've created. And we are constantly seeking out those causes because we are samsaric beings who are obsessed with the so-called perfections of samsara as opposed to the actual perfections. And as long as we are looking out for the marvels of samsara and we're seeking after those delights, then we are attached to all the causes of suffering. And as long as we are attached to the causes of suffering, of course, we're going to experience suffering. How can we be angry at someone who acts as an intermediary cause for our experience of suffering when we have spent our whole lives running after the causes of suffering? Regardless of if you believe in the hell realms or not, that's the point that is being made. We've run after the causes for distress, and then there may be intermediary beings, sentient beings or projected beings, who serve as intermediary causes for our experience of suffering, but it's still us that created those conditions, whether in this life or in past lives. So now, 47. Again, this is a verse that is incredibly powerful to meditate on, but also important that you reflect on for your own life and not try to then judge others. So it says, having been instigated by my own actions, those who cause me harm come into being. If by these actions they should fall into hell realms, surely isn't it I who am destroying them. So this is saying, in fact, when someone is causing me harm in this life, it's because I've created the causes to experience that type of harm due to whatever karma I created in the past. So I've created the conditions that will encourage others to harm me. But then when they harm me, they're creating their own negative karma, which is going to cause them greater suffering in the future. So to some extent, can it be said that it's my actions that I bear some responsibility for their creation of negative karma? That's what this verse is saying. Now you can see how this can be very slippery slope, right? But the point of it is, again, trying to reflect on our experiences in such a way to not generate anger and to generate compassion for those that cause us harm. And so this is one way of looking at it, where we say, when someone engages in a harmful action, there has to be an object, right, of their harmful action. And I, due to my karma, have become an object for the harmful actions of others. And therefore, they're going to create negative karma in response to me. Aren't I responsible for that to some extent, right? Again, this isn't about playing the blame game. It's not about feeling guilty, because that guilt is going to be useful. It's not saying I deserve to be harmed, but it is saying I've created the conditions for this harm to come about, and that harm is only going to actually cause more suffering for the harmer than it is for me. When someone causes harm to me, regardless of whose fault it is, they are acting out of anger, which is causing them to create negative karma, which is going to have a much longer tail than my experience of harm, which is why we say that anger is a bigger enemy than external enemies, right? The worst they can do is kill my body and end this life. But if I have a mind of anger and I act out of anger, I can create negative karma that takes many, many lifetimes to ripen. So I experience suffering for many lifetimes. So that anger is a much more dangerous enemy than external enemies. Well, that's true for others as well. When they're causing harm to me, they're creating negative karma that they're going to have to experience the ripening of for many, many lifetimes. And so don't I bear some responsibility for that, right? That's what this verse is encouraging us to look at. Not blaming ourselves and not saying you should feel guilty, but it's one way to help prevent your mind from becoming angry. That's the important part. That's the point of this whole section, is that I want to experience patience in response to others causing me harm. And so therefore, I don't want to have a mind that is disturbed when others cause me harm. And one of the ways I can reflect upon my experience of harm is using this technique to realize that I've created the causes for it. And in fact, by creating those causes, I have allowed others to then create their own negative karma. Now, it's true, I can't control their actions. Even if I created the causes for suffering or for experiencing harm, they still have free will. They're still choosing to harm me, right? So I don't have 100% responsibility. It's not putting the blame on me in that way, but it is another way to reflect upon my experience of harm to help prevent my mind of anger arising, right? That's the important part. And so then it continues, in depending upon them, meaning other sentient beings who cause me harm, I purify many transgressions by patiently accepting the harms that they cause. But in depending upon me, they will fall into hell realms, into hellish pain for a very long time. So since I am causing harm to them in this way, and they are benefiting, why, unruly mind, do you become angry in such a mistaken manner? So again, this is important for our own personal reflections to say that when I experience harm, it's the ripening of negative karma. And I should be joyful that that negative karma is ripening in a time and a place that I have the means to navigate it in a healthy way. Because that same negative karma, if it didn't ripen now, so say someone, beats me with a stick. If that hadn't ripened in this life, it could ripen in a future life in a heavier way that I didn't have the means to navigate, the emotional or the physical means to navigate. So whenever I experience the ripening of negative karma, I should actually be joyful because that means that's one less negative seed that can ripen in the future. And not only that, it's ripening at a time when I can do something about it. Maybe not a big thing, but I can at least control my mind to some extent, right? That same negative karma, if it became powerful enough, could ripen in me being reborn in a lower realm. But instead, it's ripening as me experiencing harm in this life. Of those two, neither of them are great, but one is a lot heavier than the other, right? So if I look at it that way, whenever I experience the ripening of negative karma, it can't ripen because it's ripened. And so therefore, I am purifying, or not purifying necessarily, but I am, what do they say? Well, they use the term purifying, I guess. Sure, purifying is fine. I'm preventing that particular negative karma to ripen in a stronger, greater way in the future by experiencing the harm of it now, which I should be joyful for. So in fact, when someone harms me, I should be joyful because that's a type of negative karma that I created the cause for, which is now ripening and I can deal with it. It's not going to get any heavier. There's a story of a teacher when he came to Tibet. One of his attendants was an Indian. I mean, a teacher was Bengali, right? And he was at Vikramasila Monastery. And then he traveled to Tibet in the 11th century at the request of the Lama Yeshua and Jajako, two kind of provincial rulers in part of Tibet. And when he traveled there, he had some attendants with him. And one is this Indian attendant. And the story goes that this attendant was like real surly, let's say. And all he did was criticize and complain all the time. And the Tibetans were like, why do you put up with this guy? Like, this guy's a jerk. All he does is complain and cause problems. And he's like, how could I practice patience if I didn't have him with me? Right? So having this guy criticize him all the time was useful for the teacher because it allowed him to practice his patience and also to ripen any small negative karmas he created in the past would ripen out of the experience of this guy criticizing him, right? So being around things that cause difficulty is not the worst thing in the world. Now, we don't need to seek out harm. We don't need to seek out harm doers. We don't need to seek out suffering because samsara, we're going to experience it no matter what, right? But when we experience it, so we don't have to go run after it. But when we experience it, we recognize that I am dealing with this now in a way that I have the tools necessary to not be overwhelmed. And that may not even have been true for me if it happened a year ago. Never mind if it happened in a future life where that pain was much more intense. So on one hand, yes, I'm experiencing suffering, but it's suffering that came about due to causes I created. And I'm experiencing the ripening of that karma at a time and a place where I have some sort of mental and emotional resources to navigate it in a healthy way. And therefore, I should rejoice that it's ripening now. And that is a much more appropriate response than being angry. And at the same time, while that's happening, the same action, my experiencing this harm at the hands of another person, is creating negative karma for them. Now, whether or not I take the blame for that on myself is secondary, but I recognize that they are creating negative karma while I'm purifying my negative karma. Those two things are happening simultaneously. And so if those two things are happening simultaneously, I should neither of those serve as a valid purpose for me to develop a mind of anger. Instead, I should have a mind that rejoices in my own ripening or my own purifying of negative karma, and a mind of compassion that says they're causing more suffering for themselves in the future. Those are the appropriate responses, not a mind of anger in either case. So we look at that one action, a person causing harm to another, and we see that depending on what side of that equation you're on, the reason for it and the results of it are going to be different. And neither of those viewpoints are valid bases for anger. So then he's asking himself, why, oh unruly mind, do you become so angry? Because anger is not going to be the appropriate response, no matter how you view this. You take a 360 panoramic view of the situation. Anger isn't ever the right answer. Anger is always only going to create more harm for yourself and others. Okay. So there's only 2 more verses for this section, so we might as well finish out the section, and then we'll have an abbreviated time for questions. The next verse is proposing 2 potential objections, right? Verse 15. And those 2 objections are essentially, one, that it can't be true that others are benefiting me, and it can't be true that I am causing harm to others, right? So it says, first, sorry, there's some sound outside that's distracting. If my mind has a noble quality of patience, I shall not go to hell. So therefore that's saying, or let's go for both of them at first, sorry. Although I am protecting myself in this way, how will it be so for them being the person causing me harm? So it's saying, isn't it the case that when others cause me harm, I'm protecting myself and I'm not benefiting them, right? Because that's what we just explained, that my experience of harm is the ripening of my own negative karma. So therefore my patience is protecting me and it is not benefiting anyone else, right? That's the question. My patience prevents me from developing anger, which then prevents me from engaging in non-virtue, but it is not benefiting anyone else, right? So therefore, I'm causing harm to others because I'm serving as an object upon which they enact, they create negative karma. And the answer to this, the response to these kind of objections is saying in verse 51, nevertheless, should I return the harm, it will not protect them either. By doing so, my conduct will deteriorate, and hence this fortitude or this patience will be destroyed. So it's saying that yes, when I practice patience, that is for my own benefit. When I practice patience, and therefore I don't experience discontent in response to others causing me harm, and therefore I don't have the fuel for my own anger, then my practice of patience is benefiting me, and it's preventing me from developing anger, being reborn in a lower realm, and so forth, from accumulating negative karma. And so my practice of patience is benefiting me, but it isn't benefiting others, is the argument. And we say, no, it is true that by being an object of others' harm, they create negative karma. However, if I respond with anger, that isn't going to prevent them from creating negative karma. And in fact, it'll encourage them to create more negative karma. When you respond for someone who harms you with harm, they just get angrier most often, right? When you respond abuse for abuse, then it exacerbates the situation. So while it may be the case that my practice of patience is intentionally or most specifically benefiting me, it's also benefiting those who cause harm to me. Because when they cause harm to me, my response is going to mediate their continued actions. So if I respond to harm in anger, then they're going to then dial up their abuse, right? How often has if someone has hurt you and you respond with anger, does that make them go away? Have you ever experienced that? Like, oh, you're angry? Okay, I won't continue hurting you. No, they get angrier, right? Because anger fuels anger. It creates a never-ending cycle. And the only way to stop that cycle is to not allow yourself to experience anger, but to put a stop to it. So that starts by not developing discontent. That starts by recognizing the many reasons that your experience of harm isn't dependent upon the external cause, which is only a secondary cause, the person causing you harm, but in fact, it's dependent on their delusions and on the karma you created. So I'm not going to be mad at someone else for having delusions because they're sentient being the same as me. I have delusions just as them. I can be mad at their delusions. In many of the Lojong texts we practice, one of our previous classes, it said that delusions are an inappropriate object upon which to practice patience. So our practice of patience shouldn't be against delusions. So we shouldn't be content with delusions, right? That's what it's saying. It's using kind of figurative language. What that means is, if I recognize you're overwhelmed by your delusions, and that's why you're causing me harm, then I shouldn't be happy about your delusions. But that doesn't have anything to do with my reaction to you, because you're under the control of your delusions, right? So the summary of this section in verse 51 is saying, yes, my practice of patience is primarily benefiting me, but at the same time, it's benefiting others because it prevents them from causing even more harm than they would otherwise. So my practice of patience is not just benefiting myself, but it's also benefiting others. Here, this is specifically talking about the practice of patience that doesn't respond in reaction to being harmed by others. So in this way, we see patience, or this particular type of patience, as being beneficial to oneself and beneficial to others at the same time. And the way we encourage this patience is, like we said, by looking at the situation from many different viewpoints, recognizing that under the control of the delusions, people act out of anger unintentionally because they misunderstand what will bring about happiness and what will bring about suffering. They act, my experience of suffering is due to my own karmic causes ripening in this life, and so forth. There are many different ways that we can experience harm others do, and then take a step back and look at it and realize that no matter which way we analyze the situation, anger is never going to be an appropriate response. And the important thing about that, again, just to summarize, because we're at the end of our time today, anger is never going to bring me happiness. Of all of the delusions, right? We talk about the many different primary delusions and secondary delusions, and sometimes called afflictions, the afflicted minds. The only one of them that is always non-virtuous is anger. Every other afflicted mind, whether it be attachment or ignorance or jealousy, can be neutral. They're not going to be virtuous, but they can be neutral. Anger and any of the derivations of anger are always non-virtuous. Always. There's never any moment of anger that is not non-virtuous. It's impossible. So therefore, you can never have positive result that comes from anger. You can have a moment that feels good that's not going to give you a long-term beneficial result. So that's why Buddhism doesn't hold to the idea that there's such a thing as righteous anger. There's anger that's understandable. Understanding context, I understand where anger comes from. That's not the same thing as being righteous, as being virtuous. Now, in my own personal work of trying to work for, justice advocacy, I like to think of the idea of outrage as distinct from anger. And this is not a Tibetan thing. In Tibetan, the word we translate as outrage is a synonym for anger. So this is my extrapolation using English and playing with language a little bit. What I see outrage as being is I look at people who are experiencing oppression or suffering, and I want to free them from that suffering and the cause of that suffering. And therefore, I feel an inability to do nothing in response to people experiencing not just suffering, but oppression specifically, right? That is what I see as outrage. So when I go to protests and I protest against people that are engaging, whatever, a police protest or in America, the immigration law force, immigration protests, these kind of things, where the government causing environmental catastrophes around the world, or, I can look at people causing harm, people engaging in acts of oppression, or systems engaging in acts of oppression, and have a mind of outrage that says, I am opposed to this act of oppression, and I want to eliminate the suffering of people that are experiencing oppression. That's not the same thing as anger. Anger is a mind that wants to cause harm to others. And the problem is we often conflate these two things because they don't happen in isolation, right? So when I am protesting against something, I'm angry at the people that are causing harm and I want to harm them in response. And at the same time, I want to remove the harm from people that are experiencing oppression. So those two things I mix together. And I say, well, therefore my anger is justified and righteous because of it wanting to help others. But the truth is, I can separate those two things. I can want to free people from oppression, and I can want to disrupt all the institutions that cause oppression, but not want to cause harm to the oppressors. So I can separate my anger, my outrage, and I can allow my outrage, which is a type of ferocious compassion, to motivate me. But anger will never be a beneficial motivation. And so this chapter, and this section especially, is saying when you experience harm, how can you respond to that without developing anger, but instead recognizing that anger is always deleterious, develop the type of patience that prevents that anger from arising. And so we'll end there because it is 12:30. But just again, as a reminder, I know we haven't had class for 4 weeks, so this is a little bit jumping in to the middle of the chapter. But you can refresh yourself on the first part of the chapter, which encourages us to recognize why anger is so harmful. And once we can have a firm conviction in the harm that anger provides to it, in the harm that anger creates in this life, then this section of how to prevent that anger from arising makes more sense and is more practical, right? If we don't have the conviction that anger is harmful, then this whole section doesn't mean anything, right? So we have to start with the conviction and the recognition that anger doesn't bring benefit to my life. And then once you realize that, then you develop the techniques to prevent that anger from arising. So that's where we're at. Okay. It is 12:30. If there's any really important question, we can take it now, either online or in person. I apologize for going so long. We covered a lot of verses today. So I encourage you to look at them and to review them. And next week, we'll have an online class. I won't be in Bangalore next week. But if there are any questions that came up from this section, you can definitely bring them to class next week. That's perfectly fine. It's worth noting that next Saturday is one of the holidays in the Tibetan calendar. It's the celebration of the anniversary of the day the Buddha taught his first sermon. It's called Wheel Turning Day. That's next Saturday. So we'll have normal class on Sunday, but on Saturday, it's also a good day to try to do some Dharma study. This is useful. It's a beneficial day. There's lots of merit. So we'll have class here in the evenings. But if you're not interested in that class on your own, I encourage you to do some very intentional spiritual practice on Saturday, just because it's one of the 4 holidays in the Tibetan calendar. And it is the recognition of the Buddha's first sermon. So that's, kind of in line with doing spiritual study, right? Okay, let us end with a brief dedication. Recognize that our time together today has created some merit, some positive karma. And instead of trying to keep that karma for ourselves, we develop the wish that we could give that merit to others, that it may ripen on others, that they might experience relief from their suffering, that they might more quickly be free from all suffering, and that we ourselves might quickly achieve the state of Buddhahood so that we might help deliver them freedom from suffering. And so we dedicate our merit to this noble end in this way. I will offer a few brief verses of dedication in the prayer book. We can go to page 235. We'll offer these 5 verses in English. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of the Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel of Bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Just as brave Manjushri and Samantabhadra too realize things as they are, I too dedicate all these merits in the best way, that I may follow their perfect example. I dedicate all these roots of virtue with a dedication praised as best by the victorious ones thus gone of the 3 times, so I might perform good works. I dedicate whatever virtues I have ever collected for the benefit of the teachings and of all sentient beings, and in particular for the essential teachings of perfect pure Losanjapa to shine forever. And then we'll just end on page 244 with the short long life prayer for His Holiness Dalai Lama. who just celebrated his 91st birthday last Monday, which is incredible. I rejoice. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Great. Thank you, everyone, whether you're here digitally or in person. Thank you so much for coming. I'm glad I had a chance to spend this time with you. Thank you.
Yeah, you can if you want.